Okay. All right, well, we will get started with our work session this evening. We have three items on the agenda. First is a check-in with the Carbondale Historic Preservation Commission. Then we'll have a discussion of our short-term rental regulations and some data updates about the number of short-term rentals that are licensed in town and kind of how that's going. And then an update from Clear on the Carbondale Geothermal project. So let's kick it off with the Historic Preservation Commission. Looks like Jared's here to lead us. And yeah, members of the commission, if you'd like to join us, you're welcome to. It's a pretty informal conversation.
Thank you guys for having us here. More annual check-ins. We scheduled this with Historic Preservation. So in your packet, staff has provided kind of a quick discussion of various accomplishments throughout this year and last year. I think one of the big ones that we want to highlight is the we were awarded a CLG, a Certified Local Government Grant, to do some updates to the Old Town to the Historic Preservation Design Guidelines for the purposes of incorporating Old Town Residential Zone District guidelines into those documents and help provide some sort of historical review context. I would say that's probably the biggest item. Some structures of merit plaques were installed throughout the year. We have 3 that are kind of on tap for this year. And then, as we've included in the staff report, a few courtesy reviews were done for projects that you all reviewed, such as the food truck court at 111 Main, the aquatic center. There was a window replacement for the Rebecca Lodge that was reviewed, and so a few projects. In addition, in the packet, there was a request from the HPC's chair, Eric Dow, to kind of express the historic preservation's thoughts and concerns about the Forest Service building that was demolished and kind of that process. And just want to make sure that that was included. You all had a chance, as I assume, the rest of the historic preservation might discuss that a little bit as well. So, I'm happy to answer any questions, but really this is an opportunity for you and the Historic Preservation Commission to touch base and check in. So I'll kind of be actively listening.
Okay. Thanks, Jared. Are other members of the commission here? If so, please join us either in one of these chairs or one of these chairs so you can introduce yourself. We can have a conversation here. Thank you for being here and thanks for those updates, Jared. Maybe we could start with introductions. We have some new members. We all have our names in front of us, so we probably won't go all the way around. But John, do you mind just starting off with your name and maybe how long you've been on the Historic Preservation Commission?
Push the button so it turns green.
Yours are green. Yep.
Oh, okay. Ours are red, yours are green.
Jesse's is red.
There you go.
John Williams. I've been on the preservation for 3 or so years, I guess.
Great.
I'm a resident OTR.
Thanks, John.
Mark Mahoney, I've been on for about 8 or 9 months.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
Heather McDonald, I think I've been here since June 2021.
Thanks, Heather.
Jess Peterson, I've been here for 3 years.
Great. Well, thank you all for volunteering to be on that commission. I mean, I don't have any specific questions. I appreciated the information in the packet. And I mean, maybe one thing would be good to talk about a little bit is where we are with this Old Town Residential Zone District design guidelines, kind of what that process is going to look like for the year. And Jared might have info there, or you all might have info there. And then just open it up to other questions from you all, or anything that we want to talk about. Anybody have an update though on kind of so we got the grant. So have we started that process of developing design guidelines, or kind of where are we with that?
We've met with 3 consultants, sort of made a choice amongst ourselves that hasn't really been discussed with the historic board yet. But it was pretty unanimous, and I felt really good about the choice. I think you did too, John, didn't you? I think we would be using the HCC guidelines as sort of an armature to build on for the Old Town residential and looking at ways of perhaps upgrading or beyond a courtesy review to get that sort of in process. What would be the next steps to where the committee maybe has a little bit more say than just a courtesy review?
Okay. Any other thoughts on that process or what the kind of goals and outcomes are?
Our structure of merit plaques are moving along. We're got the Parks and Rec approval for put signs at the Thompson House Museum, at the jail, and at the cabin. They've requested a few additional expenses such as graffiti coating, anti-graffiti coating to make it easy to wipe it off. And also, I'm gonna have them cut the sharp corner, the four corners off. And we got to get this commission's approval in the August meeting for the additional expense, but I'm pretty confident we're gonna be able to do that. There's others out there in the works that we're just, we've talked to them and they're delaying, putting it off, or it's just one of those things that until there's a deadline, people don't really typically respond.
Yeah.
So that's going well.
Great, thanks.
Question, if we are developing new design guidelines, that's what we're talking about for Old Town. And at the same time, we're considering to what extent we may or may not want to give some teeth to this commission. It seems to me that deciding that factor might be a good predicate to determining what we want the guidelines to be. If we are requiring certain things of people, if we choose to require things, that might be different than what we would just suggest that people do. And I think that, I think that's sort of amongst other things, that's one of the larger pictures here, is just to what extent HPC is much more than an advisory, we hope you do this kind of commission. I guess I having looked at a lot of our code, trying to understand where they fit in, and why someone would choose, beyond having a plaque, which feels good, why they would choose to encumber their property sort of with the designation that might limit what they can do. And I think it's a big discussion ultimately to have. I think there's probably some happy medium between here and what I understand is the way things work, maybe upriver. But I don't know, it's a thought. I mean, at this point, my understanding is HPC cannot require anything of anybody. Is that correct?
That's
So-
basically true.
Yeah, so I can jump in and maybe give a little context if that works, Ross. So you're correct. The HPC as it's currently set up is a courtesy review only, and it's only for properties within the HPC. Or HCC, excuse me, acronyms.
Yes.
They all meld together. Currently, any project would still be required to go through whatever other land use review process they might be required to go through. And within that, the HPC would make a recommendation, the Planning and Zoning Commission and or the Board of Trustees could essentially require those recommendations to be made to whatever project is before them. So that's kind of where the current maybe teeth are in the regulations. But yes, to your point, the HPC in and of itself doesn't have any quasi-judicial or regulatory authority regarding requiring certain improvements. As far as your question for kind of, chicken and egg, which is first, I think, that's one of the hopes that we were looking to get out of this process. We're having a consultant who will kind of lead some community conversations, determine what the appetite is among the residents of the Old Town Residential Zone District, as well as other neighboring zone districts, to see if there is an appetite for, any sort of quasi judicial review, or if the courtesy review only is kind of where Carbondale's appetite is. And so that's something that I think we're hoping is going to be one of those early on aspects of it. But, at the end of the day, having some sort of design guidelines that help encourage siting of a building or material compatibility or, site layout compatibility probably isn't a terrible thing for the town to have. But hopefully that gives you at least a little bit of context that we will be looking at that, and hopefully we'll get a recommendation. We do anticipate that the outcome of the design guidelines will also make strong recommendations on what the town should look at changing within our municipal code to better incorporate these design guidelines or to change the review process.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and I think it's a good question that we've discussed in, I believe, last year's meeting with the Historic Preservation Commission about sort of whether to focus first on expanding design guidelines in their current kind of form to a new area of town, Old Town Residential, or whether to first make the current guidelines kind of have more teeth. I thought we gave directions to go toward the, like, let's make the current guidelines have more teeth first before we try to expand that and sort of see how that system works. Because it seems like people are pretty comfortable with the guidelines that exist in the historic commercial core. They've been in place for a long time, and a lot of people have asked why we don't have any way to enforce them. But it sounds like we're going to get both at the same time, both recommendations from the consultants. So I can live with that.
Is the project scope specifically already designated as Old Town Residential, or are they considering some other avenue that may just, instead of focusing on zone districts, potentially say just buildings over 50 years old or something like that, townwide, that doesn't necessarily, encumber a specific zone district if there are houses on it that don't have any historic character. But I can, over on Lincoln Avenue, which is not OTR, there's a number of houses over there that are also historic that wouldn't be covered under this potential reconsideration. I guess I would be more interested in extending the review first, actually, instead of the teeth. And I guess my question also is, like, the Historic Preservation Commission may not have any teeth, but does the Planning and Zoning Commission, are they allowed to use the information provided to them by the Historic Preservation Commission in their review of the project? Or are they essentially neutered similarly in terms of only being able to follow their own zoning code and not incorporate the input of the Historic Commission?
Yeah, so if they are allowed to use that, it's kind of, for lack of better terms, a referral comment, like we would get comments from the fire district. And so one of those data points that they can use
To review to review an application. So yes, there is that. And so there is that component of the review teeth, if you will. I forgot the first part of your question, so I
I
apologize.
guess just about whether there's an avenue that's maybe instead of district, like instead of following zoning districts, just following sort of structures over a certain age, or, I guess falling into I don't know how we define if it gets into the criteria or not, but.
So that's something that we can certainly look at as we're going through this. I think the idea of the OTR zone district is it had a very defined character to it. And so preserving that character as well as some of the structures was of interest to the Historic Preservation Commission. But I do think that as we go through this, asking the community if any structure over 50 years old should be included within these design guidelines. I think that's a good question.
I think sort of how we determined whether it was relevant or not was if it had been surveyed and determined as a structure of merit.
Mhm,
That
And
was
there's a
kind
lot
of,
of structures that are in OTR that's on the structure of merit tours and
mhm,
or surveys. There's 3 surveys right now we have.
mhm. And those surveys, but they have those surveys also gone outside of OTR and looked at other structures outside of that zone district?
Here and there, like the ones on Lincoln,
Yeah, okay.
but most of them are in OTR or on the historic commercial core.
Uh-huh. Because I mean, we're having a discussion parallel with this is about ADUs. And there's been sort of a push to try to loosen the rules on ADUs. And the OTR is to some degree a target of that discussion. And so, and I don't know if what you guys might have to have more of a discussion about this amongst yourselves, but about, yeah, how much is the density of the neighborhood a historic characteristic that wants to be maintained versus is it the actual architecture of specific structures within the, are those degraded by having ADUs, the rules on ADUs loosened in that district, I guess. Maybe that's just food for thought.
I think we've somewhat talked about this on the board, and some of the discussion has arisen by finding what are the benefits or what can we give to homeowners who maybe choose to go for a historic route.
Mhm,
And maybe some of that is a slight variance. Maybe an ADU is granted on a property that isn't, wouldn't normally be allowed, or maybe there's some forgiveness in impermeable, permeable surfaces,
mhm,
or maybe a parking spot
mhm.
can be not overlooked, but sort of granted in some of those instances of willingness to keep things historic.
Mhm.
I think carrots are great, and then those are good carrots.
I mean, we do collect kind of a minuscule amount of property tax already, so I would be open to consider abatements or something along those lines if that was a carrot we could, I don't know, offer in that realm, I don't know. To people, if they want to designate something specifically under a regime where they get there's more teeth for their review, maybe there's something there, I don't know.
Well, and it sounds like maybe as the guidelines are developed, we could then look at them and say, okay, are these relevant for other zone districts that might be left out or capture them?
Mhm.
I would hesitate to set, so I live in a house that's approaching 50. It's just a ranch, 70s home. I would hardly say it's very much historic character. I mean, I love it, but so we're approaching kind of these homes that you wouldn't that are very different than Old Town.
Mhm.
And so I'd want to just be cautious in what we're considering.
Mhm.
I mean, unless like split levels are the new thing that we're protecting. So
Yeah.
that might be more,
Time
instead of
marches on.
opening it up to like an age designation of the home, or just making sure we're really thoughtful about it.
Yeah, I don't know how you define that in terms of, I mean, ideally it'd be architectural merit, I would hope, or something, but I don't, that's such a subjective term.
Yeah, I don't want to offend my neighbors.
Yeah.
Well, and I just want to clarify, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when you're talking about design guidelines, you're not necessarily talking about protection of an existing structure. It's also if there's a new structure going in, a vacant lot or something like that, right? So there's those design guidelines, and then separate but maybe related it sounds like what we're talking about right now, which is like designation and protection of existing structures. And can any of you speak to how those two things relate or don't relate to each other?
So the design guidelines, to your point, will kind of address additions, remodels, new constructions, really anything on properties and speak towards things like siting of buildings, how to work with a property that does have a historic structure or a structure of merit. But yeah, Ben, to your point, that is different from designating buildings as locally historical structures. And that process is typically done through a historic survey where we identify kind of characteristics of the town's housing stock, one item or one survey that's been floated recently is doing a survey of the town's historical log cabins. And so we'd have a consultant come out and say, okay, of all the log cabins throughout town, these are the ones that best define whatever characteristics we're looking to preserve. And then those would be included as structures of merit. And so I think one thing that could help kind of, Chris, achieve your intent there was say, maybe these design guidelines are focused on the OTR, but they kind of have some general applicability to other structures of merit that have already been surveyed and designated as such by the town. So that could be one way of incorporating some more of the historic stock without necessarily impacting Erica's soon-to-be historic home that we'll make sure is surveyed tomorrow as a structure of merit.
It's capturing a key part of our suburban development, the first suburb of Carbondale.
Historic.
It is.
Highway 133 went from being a bypass to being a strode.
Yeah.
Exactly,
Road.
right, stuck a bunch of us over there.
Jared, I thought I understood this, and now I think I don't. A structure of merit is a designation that's created without the invitation of the landowner, or only with the invitation and approval of the landowner.
Correct. The town has kind
Which
of, the town has three kind of categories, right? General housing stock, structures of merit, which are surveyed by a professional who determines that there's historic value locally, and then a local landmark is the third one, which is includes a lot more kind of restrictions and what you could do.
Okay.
The structures of merit is something that the town surveys and just designates different properties as structures of merit based on
You can't
their
decline
value.
to be a structure of merit. You either have one or don't.
Correct.
Okay.
But those don't really include any restrictions necessarily today. The local landmark is the one that requires the homeowners acceptance of that or voluntarily going into that. And that's where our codes allow for town funds to potentially be used to help restoration projects or other related things to help preserve those local landmarks. I don't believe we have any local landmark other than the Thompson House, which is also on the National Register.
Which is why we can get grants if we need to like renovate.
For the Thompson House.
And so are you fairly confident that you've said you've done 3 of these surveys in the past, that at this point we have kind of gone through we've combed the town and we've collected the structures that are of merit or not?
No, log cabins and panabodes would be sort of the next
Okay,
category.
okay.
Sorry, just log cabins and what?
Panabodes, it's a type of log structure, sort of.
Over on
deep-
Cleveland, there's a handful of them. They're sort of like the manufactured log cabin.
Yeah.
Yeah, like our first survey was like basically on the historic commercial core, and they concentrate on that. So we did like the El Dorado building and all that stuff.
Mhm.
Well, the 2015 and 16, was it those the years? Or was it that 17?
17.
Those ones were just the residential areas.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I would be, I would, ideally, I would like us to have as comprehensive of a survey of structures of merit. And I mean, I'm not too wedded to OTR necessarily as a zone district having, I mean, the regulations are anyway not even going to apply to all the houses in OTR because there are plenty of houses in that district that are not historic or a structure of merit, in my opinion. And do those houses would those get encumbered in this? They wouldn't get encumbered anyway by this in that case, would they? Or
So as currently drafted, any property in the OTR would be reviewed per these design guidelines. With that being said, there's a recognition that maybe a structure that doesn't have any historic value, isn't adjacent to any historic value, you might not utilize all of the guidelines, and maybe you just focus on siting and massing and some things like that to continue kind of more of the pedestrian context as opposed to the architectural context. So yes, as currently envisioned, any property in the OTR would be
Okay.
subject to these design guidelines, and not standards, but guidelines.
And so would that be first an administrative review, or would that mean that every single one of those projects would have to go through the HPC?
That's part of what we're hoping to find out through the public process.
Yeah, I think I would prefer, obviously, if we could kind of establish the structures of merit now, or, at some point, or get to that point, and then sort of leave aside the district potentially, I guess, unless you think that there are adjacencies. I think that could be an important point, but and then have pretty much a set number of structures that would be eligible for this, and try to limit the scope of what has to go through this level of review, if it's a non-merit structure, basically.
Well, originally, when we asked for the budget last year, we were planning to do the log cabin survey, but we actually got the grant for the CGL. So we decided to switch gears and go with that first and figure out our public process and figure out like exactly what people want to do with the HPC and HCC, the OTR, if they really want to do, how much guidelines that we can actually enforce and which ones they don't really want. Oh, sorry. Need to be closer. Yeah, sorry. But they really need to figure out what kind of guidelines that we should work with too.
Okay.
Just right now, it feels like, oh, we just recommend, but will the architect or whoever is the person coming in to do the design guideline, will they do what we say? Is there a way to enforce it? Sometimes we keep losing structures because it didn't come through. And that's one of the things we are kind of worried about, is losing some historic character around town.
Any other trustees have input, feedback, questions on this topic?
I'm really interested to hear kind of what these neighbors and folks are thinking, because I think this outreach is really, really fantastic, because it's easy for us to sit up here and think what we want to see, but I'd love to hear from the folks in those homes and neighborhoods. So I think that's an awesome first start, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what folks think.
When do we expect to have something to see?
So kind of next steps is the historic preservation at their August meeting will review a recommendation from staff to select a consultant. We will present the contract to the Board of Trustees to execute, hopefully on the August 13th meeting. And then after that, we will kick off the project depending on the consultant chosen. The timelines kind of vary, but most have kind of looked at anywhere from about 8 months to a year worth of a process to do some public outreach, prepare drafts, prepare exhibits, and then ultimately present stuff back to the public and the blessing of the trustees.
Okay. Was there anything else specifically that you all wanted feedback on or direction on, or the staff wanted direction on? What I'm hearing is support for a process. We're not trying to predetermine the outcome of that process. We're not given really clear direction right now. I think intentionally on, how much teeth something should have. I think we're encouraged that you're going to do a public process. So if you're feeling like we're not giving a lot of clear direction, I think that kind of makes sense in the current context. But if there's anything you need clear direction on, now's the time to ask.
Just to let you know, we've put together a walk-in tour also. You may know about that for online, based on there's about 70 homes that have been designated structures of merits, and we've incorporated all those to take care of the rest of the town. So that just a point of information for you. I think it's on Clio, is that the deal? Yeah. You gotta be pretty internet savvy to find it, but it's out there.
We're currently making, how like the Art Around Town has those little postcards everywhere. We're doing a similar version of that, but for the Clio tour with different sections. So we have like historic commercial core. We have, was it the northwest and like the northeast area? It'll have the Clio QR code on the back. And so that's something that you can do seasonally, like, and change the front cover of like different buildings that we have.
Great.
So we're working on that, and hopefully we'll be able to get that in
Is there,
like around in a month or so.
is there a link on the town website to this thing?
There
Yes,
is.
we do.
Okay. Have you talked to the tourism board also about putting it on their website?
No, but we will.
So,
Okay.
can I ask one more thing? This is sort of for you, Jared. I'm just a little concerned about, I unfortunately missed the meeting about energy code updates. Does all the historic stuff go through the planning department, or is the building department also involved in this?
Both.
I guess I'm just worried about, like, is the staff, what's your opinion of staff overload? It seems like we've had sort of backlog issues on building projects in town. And I'm just concerned, like, do we need to start thinking in terms of budget process? So like, do we need a staff member to be a tech on some of these things? Because it seems like we have been here, I don't know, maybe you have an opinion on this, Lauren.
We'll be talking about that probably for the first time formally at the board retreat.
Okay, yeah,
In
I
August.
think we should just put that on the agenda to talk about that.
I think up and down the valley, everybody's backed up.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
Anything else, Jared?
I just wanted to address Eric's letter since he's not here. And I don't want to gloss over that because I think that was a big topic and certainly something that you folks as a commission put a lot of effort and time into. Certainly at the time where you folks wrote a letter to that you wanted to deliver as a commission, addressing concerns with the Forest Service development, and it's not time to relitigate that development. However, I do at the time the board of trustees basically said or said verbatim that the HPC works for the BOT. I was told that, and I think just for clarity, what I would have said would be go ahead and write your letter and send your letter, because there's nothing in here that precludes you from doing that. Everyone here could choose to fire you from the board, but as I read the historic preservation portion of the municipal code, you are formed by the board for the town. As opposed to other advisory commissions where the language is much different, where advisory boards are set up as basically kind of working for the BOT. And so I'm less concerned with how we ultimately define that relationship than I am with how it currently is, and making sure we clarify it. If it's the board's opinion that we want this commission to be an advisory committee for us, everything that they say or do has to come through us, then we need to change the code, because as it is, they have 15 or 13 duties and responsibilities, powers and duties, and only when you get down to 10 is that advise the board of trustees. Among the other things they're supposed to be doing is actively encouraging town landowners, to preserve things. If they deem that the best way to actively encourage landowners to do something is to, as a group, say, we think you ought to do this. I think that's, as currently stated here, seems to be somewhat of your prerogative. And I don't know, I think there's some stuff to figure out. And I think in that particular case, it was misplayed in my opinion. And again, not to relitigate it, but what happened following that was that BOT had a letter, said, basically, we have a letter of our own, let's go with this. That letter was delivered. I don't know that you guys ever got a response. I don't know that the public never got much of a detailed response to the questions posed either in your letter or in the one, I think, Erica, that you worked on. And I think you're owed some explanations for that. I mean, the ship has sailed. I don't know whether we're in the repair phase or the maintenance phase of the building over there, but I think you are owed some explanations for your hard work and determination that went into putting that together. You put yourselves out there. And as a board unanimously, I believe, decided that this was worth making a statement. I will add to that having dug into all the NEPA regulations and that sort of stuff, had that been allowed to go through, that would have been sort of a legal peg on which to question and reopen the case file because the Forest Service did not look at existing interested parties when this happened. And not to get too deep into it, but that would have been one thing to hang a hat on it to oppose that project in the late stages. And so I'll leave it at that. I think there's just some discussion to be had about how we see the role of HPC and maybe how code should reflect that.
Okay, thanks, Ross.
So Jared, in terms of the scope of work for the study and the consultant team, is there any room that kind of gets to Ross's concern about best practices around HPC in small communities and teeth versus recommendations, being more specific about their role so they could potentially highlight a concern for the board around historic preservation, regardless of standing in our code, so that, they're the ones that are looking at this the most, not us. And I don't know if there's room in the grant and the project scope people all across the country are dealing with historic preservation. So could we glean from that, knowing that we're not probably adopting a process that Aspen has, but how could we get one that fits what Carbondale needs and also support the work that they're doing?
I would say, yes, it's probably tangentially in the current scope, but yes, there's room within the kind of current project and the HPC's budget allocation to maybe expand the scope slightly to ensure that question's looked at.
And what's the budget for the project?
So this project was funded via a CLG grant, which I believe is for $25,000.
Okay.
And then the HPC was budgeted in 2024 for roughly $30,000 in case the grant wasn't received,
Okay.
so that they could pursue this project.
Okay.
And so I think within that, there's some additional budget room to look at that.
I don't know how other people, but I would encourage you to think how we can make sure that happens so that not only do they address this issue of new districts, what do we do first, structures of merit, all that stuff, but also how can we improve, what suggestions would be suggestive so we can improve the process so they have a feeling like they can preserve the historic integrity of buildings in the town and not just make recommendations and people ignore them. But how do we do it in a context of what's been going on in Carbondale and places where we kind of missed the boat, and how do we learn from that so it doesn't happen again? Just really appreciate your time. I mean, you guys are working on this and there's no remuneration except that you care about this stuff. So really, really appreciate your time. So I want to make sure that you have the tools you need to do the work you want to do. So thank you.
All right. Thank you for the update. Thanks, Jared, for your leadership on this, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda is a short-term rental discussion. I think we have some folks here interested in weighing in on that, and we'll definitely give you an opportunity to speak. I think quick history is that we're just now 2 years into our first ever regulations on short-term rentals in town. It was a concern brought to us by a group of local residents who are concerned about what's happened in a lot of mountain communities where short-term rentals have really exploded in a short period of time and really had a major impact on local workforce housing. And so we investigated the issue and put in place some regulations that to just sort of hold steady for a while, gather data, and assess the situation with really a goal to strike a balance between the needs of our business community, to have visitors in town, and we know that we have very limited lodging in Carbondale, to balance that with our very limited workforce housing stock and the fact that you can get a lot more, the property value might be driven up if people are doing the math on what they could get per night rather than per month on a rental. So we've got regulations that ended up really being pretty strict, where you can only have a short-term rental that's not your primary residence in the downtown area, or if you had it in operation before these regulations first went into effect. And so what we know is that that's effectively a moratorium on new non-primary resident short-term rentals in 90% of town or so. And then River Valley Ranch, our biggest subdivision and homeowners association, recently banned them. And so we've got some data tonight that I think is really worth considering. And we're not going to make any decisions tonight, but it's an opportunity to hear from people and hear from staff and just kind of think about what direction do we want to head from here? Do we want to stay the course? Do we want to make our restrictions any more restrictive or any less restrictive? Lauren, what would you like to add before we?
I just wanted to, you summed most of the memo up pretty concisely, but we've really been doing a lot of thinking about why we have literally half as many short-term rentals that are licensed this year as we did a year ago, June.
Can you just share those numbers for the public?
Certainly. We had, as of June of 2023, there were 71 licensed short-term rentals in Carbondale. About a half of them appeared to be second homes or investment properties. Only 3 property owners were listed as having multiple short-term rental properties in Carbondale. And all of those were multiple units in the same building. And I say those particular little factoids because when we first had our conversations in January and February of 2022, one of the big concerns and assumptions was that investors were coming in, buying multiple properties just for investment purposes and making them into short-term rentals. And when we did our licensing and made our regulations, we found that that was not, in fact, what we had in town. There were a couple of investor-owned properties, but for the most part, these are regular people trying to rent out either a portion of their home or their entire home when they are not here. And there were a few that were second homes. As of right now, we have 35 licensed short-term rentals, so half. And so as a staff, we've been talking about, well, why is that? We know that River Valley Ranch is banned. There are only a couple of those short-term rentals left. And I believe that's because River Valley Ranch said, if you have reservations, we'll allow you to run out your reservations, but then you have to shut the service down. We have a few that we think were, well, I can be grandfathered because I've done this a couple of times and there's a possibility I might do it again. So I'm going to go ahead and get a license. But those people chose not to renew. We have denied, I believe, 3 renewals of short-term rentals. When we first began the program, we were not doing physical, we didn't have a building official or building inspector. We were not able to do physical inspections in order to license operations. We got a lot of information that was fuzzy. We had pictures that we couldn't tell which room this was, or was that really an egress window or what have you, just for life safety issues. So in the past year, we have started to do physical inspections. We send a building inspector out. They are only looking for life safety issues. They're not looking for everything that might not meet code in the property. But there have been 3 denials of renewals due to safety issues, bedrooms without egress windows, et cetera, et cetera. And And then I suspect that there are some that just didn't bother renewing and are continuing to operate, and we have not been able to catch up to them on enforcement yet. We're in the process of working on that. But the license cannot be transferred to a subsequent buyer. So if someone has a short-term rental license and they sell their house and they are not either in the HCC or have it be their principal residence, that property is no longer eligible under our current regulations to be licensed as a short-term rental. So as time goes on, this is a declining asset on its own accord based on our regulations. We did not instigate our short-term rental licensing in order to collect tax. This is not necessarily, the purpose of this program is not to make money. However, we are making some money. It's going into a fund to help pay for affordable housing. And as this pot of short-term rentals, licensed short-term rentals shrinks, so does the short-term rental tax revenue. So obviously that's not the first priority, but it deserves to at least be discussed and thought about. And the other thing is that we are not gaining, at least at the moment, any more traditional lodging. So, as much as that affects the economic vitality of Carbondale, whether people can come here and eat here and stay here and play here, that's a consideration as well.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. Any questions? Yeah, clarifying questions before we hear from the public?
Just have a question about when folks are notified that there will be an inspection. Is that before they apply for renewal?
It's part of the licensing process. So when they are going online to apply, first of all, it's in our code that it will be inspected, but it's all part of that application or renewal process. So it's not that they apply and then they're told that they have to have an inspection. That's all part of the same work plan, and that's available online for everyone who applies. They can see where their application is in process, who it's waiting on, whether they need, when their inspection should be scheduled. I am not sure whether they call for the inspection or whether the building inspector or the town clerk calls them to schedule the inspection, but it's been part of the process for quite some time.
I just wonder if it's discouraging folks from getting a license, knowing that they have to have the building official come to their house and do an inspection.
Can you say any more about that? Like, what are you thinking? That they'd be worried about some other code violation that got found?
It's pretty clear in our application that is not what we're checking for.
I totally understand that.
And it may, in fact, somebody who has an illegal ADU and has been using it as a short-term rental may not want to renew because they don't want to get shut down. I don't know the answer to that.
And I just wonder if there's code violations that they know they have that have nothing to do with their STR, and they just are like, I'm not risking it.
It's possible.
Sure, there's some cases.
Thanks. Other questions? I think before we weigh in on what we think we should do, we should hear from the public. So join us. This is pretty informal, but you can come up one at a time and speak at the mic. You're also welcome to just kind of sit with us if you'd like to. Yeah, that's great. Either wherever you're comfortable, Brittany, and just introduce yourself for people that don't know you. And if other people are, kind of
Brittany, just push that button on
organized
that
here, feel free
microphone.
to join us.
Yep.
Hi, It's me, Brittany Haley, coming to chat about short-term rentals. I just wanted to notate some things I've noted or I've noticed over the past 2 years and just bring them to the table. Piggybacking on what Lauren's June 2023 to now fact, I have noted, we as a manager myself, I have nowhere to host anyone in Carbondale anymore. So I've had many of my Carbondale units turn over because they're sold. And like you said, the license doesn't transfer. I've lost 3 houses in RVR, or the homeowners have just moved back in. So those, and a lot of them were all grandfathered units. So now those are lost licenses that cannot, we can't get new ones. So I don't believe it's had any effect on home prices. I don't know if anyone else.
Can I ask what you do?
Yeah.
Since we're new, I just would, you said you have managed.
Yes, so no, that's fine. Hi, welcome. I manage a boutique, or I own Boutique Mountain Homes. So we manage short-term rentals. So anywhere from Aspen to Glenwood. And Carbondale was a large bulk of my properties for a long time. And then 2 years ago, we went through the regulation process, and then I've just kind of slowly seen the turnover because of those items I mentioned. We're just not able to gain any new ones. No effect on home prices. I've seen really, I follow the market very closely, no effect on rental prices. It's really driving a lot of my guests to the county or to other towns. We get a lot of people that say like, hey, I want to stay in Carbondale. This is what I'm looking for. And I've moved out of my private home because they're like, we need to stay in Carbondale. There's nowhere to go. So I just moved somewhere else with my kids. So it's really fun. So I think we're missing out on a lot of tax revenue that would normally come in. So a big example I saw was back in April for 5 points. Normally Boutique Mountain Homes hosts everyone involved with 5 points for a big discount to get everyone to come to Carbondale and host just anyone involved in the film. And so we normally host everyone, and we could not this year. So we did one house that was mine. I just gave it to them. So everyone went to the Hoffman. So it was God knows how many people. They all went to a Marriott hotel in Basalt. So all that tax revenue just went to Basalt, including restaurants, all that stuff. No more RVR houses. And I still have an issue with only allowing the ADUs to be short-term rentals. Obviously the primary homeowners ADU. I think that was the whole flaw in the group that brought the argument to the table was those are the affordable houses, the ADUs. So we really just incentivize people to short-term rent their ADUs. Those are the affordable houses. But the big ones, that they can just sit empty. It just, to me, the logic isn't there. And then piggybacking off of Lauren, the new 6% tax that we suggested, a lot of, people that are for short-term rentals and allowing fair regulations, that tax is dwindling because we have half the amount. And I strongly believe, and I think this is a factual statement, the only way to create affordable housing is to build affordable housing. So I just want to do a little example. I searched 13 comparable Carbondale cities, cities comparable to Carbondale in Colorado. And I just want to share examples of how they deal with short-term rentals. And I just want to make it clear, I do not want short-term rentals everywhere. I live here. I don't think that they should just grow willy-nilly. But I just think this says a lot. So of the 13 examples, Pagosa Springs, restricted by zone, and these all have very nuanced regulations within them, but I'm just kind of summarizing them. I'm not going to give you guys all the details. Pagosa Springs, capped by zone. Montrose, none, just have to be licensed. Ridgeway, capped by zone. Buena Vista primary residence has no limits. Not primary is capped by zone. Steamboat capped by zone. Aspen capped by zone. Basalt is unrestricted. Glenwood Springs, 200-foot buffer zone. Eagle, none, just get a license. Vale, unlimited, you must just get a license. Ouray, capped by zone. Silverthorne, capped by zone. Durango, capped by zone. So this was going back to my original suggestion 2 years ago is, Carbondale should consider these other small mountain towns that are very much like us. I think that the current regulations are hurting tourism. I've heard from other business owners that they feel it's hurting tourism. Why are we still doing it like this? Okay, thank you. That's all I have to say.
Brittany, can you just clarify one thing for me? When you mentioned about ADUs, I don't think our regulations treat ADUs any different from any other part of the building. So tell me more about that concern.
So if it's your primary resident, you're allowed to rent the ADU.
Or a bedroom or the whole thing. If it's your primary residence, you can rent any or all parts of it.
Correct, but the main house is capped at 183 days.
Well, the property has to be your primary residence, but we don't get into where you live on the property and how you split it up if you want to rent it out.
I
So-
guess, yeah, I guess what I'm saying is there's no cap on how many days you can rent it. Am I not understanding that?
That's correct. There's no cap on how many days you can rent it, but the definition of primary residence is 183 days or more that you actually live there.
Yes,
So
but if I left for a year, say if I just went
Right,
somewhere
then
else.
it's not your primary residence anymore.
Okay,
But we don't carve out ADUs. I just want to clarify.
Okay,
the point of
yeah,
fact.
yeah.
You could live in the ADU and rent out the main house. You could live in the main house and rent out the ADU.
yeah,
You could live in the basement. You could rent out a room. You could rent it out just when you go on vacation. If it's your primary residence, you have pretty much free reign over how you deal
okay,
with it.
yeah, no, that makes sense. And the historic core commercial, I think is a great way to do things. I think that was the win of everything.
Well, and I think to Brittany's point is, and we talked about this when we were making the regulations, acknowledging that we were trying to, and we were simultaneously working with P and Z to incentivize people to build ADUs. And then we're essentially incentivizing them to do short-term rental in their ADU because that's the only place you can do it.
Yeah,
Um,
I guess that's my argument. Yeah.
Whereas, and so we had even kind of discussed, oh, that's really interesting because that could be affordable housing for people because that is a small unit.
Yeah,
Much more likely that that is somebody's potential rental for a full-time employee or workforce housing, I guess I should call it, than the second home of somebody that's sitting there with 6 bedrooms or.
Yeah,
you know.
it doesn't make sense to rent something for
Right.
2,500 that's 6 bedrooms.
Anyway.
Let's hear from others who also like to share perspectives on this with us. Yes. Okay. Tell us your name, please, first.
Yeah.
My name is Hunt Walker.
Hunt,
I
thanks.
live in Crystal Village, one of the newer filings. I've rented my home, either a room in my home or a whole house when I go on vacation. I started in December of 2014, primarily because I retired in the 70s. I spent all my time running rivers, not making money. And then when it got around to retirement time, I noticed, I could use a little additional income and be able to still continue to live here. So I started it in December 2014. As far as the number of rentals, most, 90% of them as a single room, the bedroom. Obviously, I make more money when I rent the whole house, but that only happens like three or four times a year. And so the regulations haven't really impacted me. Because I live there 183 days a year, so that's not an issue. Really, the kind of the conversation is whether you want to open up and be a little bit more liberal with people that have those second homes sitting there or as an investment. And I just like to say in general, it doesn't really impact me, is that in my case, if you, let's say you just ban STRs all across the board, including primary residence, I'm not going to open them up my house to a rental. It's not going to, I understand the whole problem of affordable housing in the valley, and I was lucky enough to coming here in the seventies, like a lot of us at this table. But I'm not going to open it up to rental. What they allowing me to run as STR, the way it works is I get to block the calendar and open up. For example, I have my grandkids there and their families here for about 6 weeks. And then, you know, when they're not there, I can open it up. So there is the case, although it doesn't appear like there are many, you know, second home or investment properties, that there's a possibility that those could be rented long-term. But I have friends, not necessarily in this area, that have STRs. Yeah, it's not their primary home. They'll go ahead, they'll rent it STR wise, but if it came down to rent it, they'll just shut it down. It'll just sit empty. So when the case was made 2 years ago, oh, we're just hammering, you know, we don't have enough houses for employee rental, long-term employee rentals. It's just not gonna, if you shut us down, it's not gonna open, maybe a few, but it's not gonna open it up that much. So far, for me, it's been successful. I think you're gonna spend a little bit more time talking about whether you want to be a little bit more liberal with those homes that are not primary residence. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Mike. Anybody else? Say anything? Just go down the line.
James McGuire. I have one short-term rental here in Carbondale. I'm one of the ones who's grandfathered in because I started doing it and coming to these council meetings early on. And I personally just live above a garage because it's more affordable for me. And so if like you said, if you were to take away or completely restrict short-term rentals, that my house wouldn't be available in the rental pool either, because I would move into it and get roommates basically, probably, to afford it. I think Brittany said most of my thoughts. I would reiterate that some of my guests have made comments about the high tax that got implemented via vote. And I don't know, I think we need more tourist dollars here. 35 licenses is not a lot. It's not like the big scare that that group had predicted when we first started talking about this. So I would like to see more lenient rules and maybe remove the primary residence rule. That's all I got.
Okay, thanks, James.
Hi guys, KG and Eddie, live on 282 Cleveland and own and operate 689 Main Street. Short-term rental wise, we have 2 hotel rooms up above there, based off of having no other STRs in Carbondale. Really, it's really busy, especially during the summer and picking up in the winter. The awful piece is Main Street isn't. I think the vitality and vibrancy on Main Street for small businesses and locally owned restaurants, cafes, retail establishments, whatever it is not. I think you could talk to anybody and they might on the street be like, oh yeah, we're doing okay. It's like we're just doing okay. Having that number shrink from 70 to 30 in the last 2 years and no focus on conventional lodging is tough. We capture a ton of people after a hike, coming in for a cup of coffee, lunch, proposition them for dinner, and they're like, we're staying in Willits, we're in Glenwood. Carbondale has always suffered from the half a day tourism and not the day and a half. And I think we're really just starting to feel that in the vitality of Main Street. So I do think lowering the restrictions or rethinking how short-term rentals can help bring some more tourism dollars in is a good idea, but I don't think it's the long-term solution. Just based off of how Carbondale set up, I think the conversations that will come up with affordable housing and the ability the town has with ADUs to have that become more of a pathway for affordable housing and options for people to live in the downtown area. I think it really comes down to not taking it easy on our tourism, but really thinking about how we add conventional lodging long-term. Because I understand affordable housing is an issue that we need to focus on. If all of those affordable units are for people driving up valley to work, it hurts Carbondale's commercial core. So that's just sort of what I have felt in the last little bit of first Fridays are crazy. Every other one is not so much. Saturdays are one of our slowest days. I think you could talk to across the board in Carbondale, and I think it truly is because everybody's outside and then nobody stays here. So it's just a wild thing. You're like, all right, Saturday. And then you're like, okay. So just, I think just to add conventional lodging as a priority for the town, I think would help a lot of the things that are bubbling up in issues of how we're doing this. It's really needed.
Thanks, Kate.
Can I add one piece of data that goes with Cade's, what he just said? I have some statistics here that are showing money spent in Colorado for overnight leisure travelers, overnight business travelers, and then just a day visitor. So it's on average, $551 spent per person for an overnight leisure traveler, $959 for an overnight business traveler, and $96 for a day visitor. And that's, I don't know, some data taken from the state.
Thanks.
So I ditto a lot of what has been said previously. We have the building over in back of Fat Belly with 2 SDRs in them, a 2-bedroom and a 1-bedroom. People really love staying on Main Street. The reality is, we're at the point of looking at the books and going, maybe it wouldn't be as much work if we were just to rent this out as to professional renters, in the professional zone, whether it be architects, realtors, obviously not probably laborers, but we're sort of coming to that point where as things get more expensive and we're trying to be competitive, I think we're hitting that zone where it's an equilibrium and it's a lot more work. And I think if you guys add a lot more work to that, it's going to sort of shut things down even more. And I think it's really a sort of a fragile economic environment. And I think this short-term rental plays a vital part. If we were to get Brittany to manage it for us, we would definitely be in that zone of, why don't we just rent it out long-term? And I think it's a asset and a benefit to all of downtown.
So are you saying that the regulatory part of it is what adds to your work?
That adds to the equation.
Okay, or is it that the tax is something we've passed and exists? I don't think we're going back on that. But is that what are you referring to that?
I think he's getting at rent prices have gone up so much. The work of hosting people and running a short-term rental or just doing a long-term lease with a professional, the money's
about the same.
Getting really close.
Yeah, with the utilities and with the cost of furnishing everything and paying like the property taxes. I mean, all of both my houses, we couldn't even get property taxes this year. They're like, you can pay 3 times as much because there's like wood present on your house. So like.
Brittany, earlier though, you said that the option was basically short-term rental or nothing. And now I'm hearing sort of the opposite. And I'm curious that either a second home was either going, it's not that these are not people who want to rent places, but they might want the income from short-term rental. So I guess I'm trying to clarify.
Yeah. So I mean, a second home, like they want to come visit. They visit regularly. And so a long-term rental is just not an option because then they couldn't use the home and visit. So that's what happened to like pretty much every RVR house.
To be clear, they could still do month to month, because this, unless they're coming every month, like this only affects 30 days and less, just so
Right.
that we know what people's options are. Did you have something to share?
Yeah, my name's Gabe Molnar. I'm a resident here in Carbondale. I also work in commercial real estate, and I work with a lot of property business owners, small business owners. So I guess, you know, what Kate had said and what others have said, the economics are really important to consider. Our small businesses. You know,
Small businesses what?
small businesses struggle.
Okay.
And just to introduce, I mean, the human element to it, I have a short-term rental, it's in Redstone. Picken County passed some regulations, I think it's about a year and a half now, which essentially eliminated short-term rentals in Redstone. Obviously a much smaller community, but you can see the impact that it's had on Redstone. And you know, I think it's important to understand, to remember when we're thinking about a small town, nobody wants to see regulations. But RBR, you know, they've now said no short-term rentals at all. They have very strict regulations in other words. Your grass needs to be green and overwatered. You can only plant certain trees. You know, we all know that there's, you know, and there's certain aesthetics and those appeal to some people and not to others. That's fine. I just think when you look at RVR and then you look at the rest of Carbondale, do we want to be, you know, very strict and not have vitality, not have that somewhat messy vitality? I think when you think about short-term rentals, think about the regulations, you have to consider the human element. And it's really important to understand that a lot of the people that come here for short-term rentals are here for quinceañeras, for weddings, for funerals, for all kinds of family events, for concerts, for music festivals, film festivals, and we want those people in our town. I've seen a huge impact in a neighborhood near RPR since they shut down short-term rentals. There were lots of people walking their dogs who were coming to the neighborhood and waving hi. Several short-term rentals in my immediate neighborhood. People are nice. Nobody wants every house or every other house to be a short-term rental. We also don't want dark houses. I think that's what we're seeing more of, and that's what you're going to see in RVR. It's dark houses. We want people to come here. We want that messy vitality, and I think part of the messy vitality is having visitors, more visitors in our town.
Thanks, Gabe. Thank you. Well, let's bring it back to the board just for, you know, I think clarifying and then start a discussion on, do we want to head in the direction of stay the course, or do we want to open up a process of either loosening or tightening the regulations that we have in place? Christina?
I have a question. I might have missed it in the memo, but how many available residential structures does the town of Carbondale have?
You mean just like total houses?
Yeah.
In town? We had that number when we started and I can't remember.
2,600.
2,600?
I was gonna say it's about 2,600.
Thank you.
It was a very small percentage. I think it was less than 2% of our total stock, even at the high point. That were short-term rentals.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting to the point of discussing whether vitality and number of visitors is a consideration or whether it's a concern. And we're hearing from folks that have concerns. I would like to hear a little bit more, you know, see a few more facts and figures just in terms of lodging. Like how many days a year are we full up? I mean, how many days can you speak to that?
Just from tourism council or like numbers?
Yeah.
The summer has a peak for the days in and comfort in during your summer lodging, but I don't have like the percentages there, but a percentage of tax wise, we have a higher lodging tourism tax than Snowmass. It's a higher percentage that we take.
Mm-hmm.
And we are collecting like around $100-ish, $100,000 to $120,000 in that tax revenue. Snowmass collects $9 million. So
Okay.
your occupancy rate for
Right,
the
that I was
days
looking
in,
for.
the occupancy rate, days in, comfort in,
Yeah.
from the last numbers I heard, they fluctuate between 65 and like 75%.
So pretty much there's always room available in town, or no?
There's-
This is
Yeah.
this is
so
not
if you
judgmental. I'm
drive-
just
if
really
you-
curious.
If you drive by the comfort and days in, you don't see many like minivans or families staying there. It's construction workers.
Okay.
So I think a lot of those numbers are skewed based off of the work and the subcontractors that are coming up to the valley. The true number of tourism getting captured in those two lodging operations, I have no idea.
So one option too, this is crazy, but like one option, if we want more vitality, is encourage the rooms that are currently available in our town that are not unoccupied, like funnel people to them so that we get more people that go to Comfort Inn versus going to Glenwood or Basalt? Or do we think that's just out of there? They want an Airbnb.
Nobody wants to stay there.
Okay, yeah, I agree.
So from just from I
Yeah.
think a demographic that our Carbondale Main Street hits.
Yeah.
There are tourists who are traveling through here that would want to stay in Carbondale and don't have the lodging option available to them.
And so
Walkability.
Sure.
But those people would prefer to stay in the Hoffman, to me, has no apparent aesthetic difference. I mean, it's a new hotel, but it's the same.
It's the people staying at the Hoffman, your like wall mates at the Hoffman are very different than the ones that Comfort Inn and Days
And
Inn.
you should go spend a night at the Days Inn and Comfort Inn and a night at the Hoffman, and there's a clear difference in what those are providing.
Okay.
We also have tons of families coming here, and the family doesn't want to be split up into different hotel rooms. That's what Airbnb and VRBO provides. It allows that establishment for the family to be together in large groups. And
We used to host tons of. I don't think this is working.
Red is
Okay.
on for you.
Red
for
is
you.
on. Great. That's up.
one. It's green on the
Oh,
other one.
okay, just to throw me off. We used to have a ton of people coming for weddings, and family reunions, and the ban from RVR has essentially eliminated that. I haven't seen a single one this summer. So if that helps.
I have to say the RVR thing is moot. We don't have any control over what they
Oh, no, I
decide.
totally
So-
understand.
And that's a little bit gives me some pause in terms of opening up supposed second homes, because that's where the lion's share of them are in RVR already. So opening that up doesn't really necessarily change the equation necessarily.
It opens up the ability to house more people, because as of right now, there's nowhere that really sleeps more than 4 people. There's not many places that sleep more than 4 people because they're all ADUs.
But do we think there's a lot of second homes in Hendrick Park?
There are a lot of second homes everywhere, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just push back. I mean, I don't know if we can prove a negative in terms of the home prices or the rental prices. We don't know. The point of the regulation originally was prophylactic. It wasn't supposed to be killing an existing crisis. It was supposed to be heading off an impending crisis. And I think we succeeded in that, but of course, everything can cause an overcorrection. And I think we all agree that we don't want to tighten anything any further. I don't think there's anybody wants to go any tighter, but I think we want to be careful about how we loosen it up. My ideal feeling would be, the original intent of Airbnb and VRBO and these things was that you have your house, you go on vacation, you rent it out. The regulatory process that we've created obviously has created barriers to me saying, I went to Massachusetts for 2 weeks. What if I just wanted to rent for 2 weeks of the year, my house out? I'd have to spend $200 or whatever for the license. And then I'd have to go through this process of inspection and stuff. I would be interested. My main concern here is the staff question around it. But if there was sort of a light license, essentially, tier that was, up to 30 days a year, 30 days or less, up to 30 days for people that would not include an inspection and may have a lower licensing fee. And I mean, it wouldn't help you in your business because it would be people probably doing a more informal thing. But I think obviously there's questions there about, does that pollute our inspection process of the longer term projects or like
Be a health and
properties and
safety
stuff?
issue.
I don't think it's about the inspection process, Chris. It's just we have no way to enforce that. We have no way to know whether they have rented it out for 35 days or 65 days or 120 days.
What is the software that we bought supposed to do for us
The
then?
software is a licensing software. And it basically will tell us if somebody is advertising a short-term rental and they are not licensed in our system. But when we get information, for example, lodging tax from Airbnb, we do not get that by property per day. We have no way of knowing what's rented out for how many days of the year.
So the software, it's combing these sites though, right? It doesn't have the ability to say this.
Combing the advertisements, but not the availability. So if somebody is on Airbnb and they only rent their house out, like if they blocked out everything because they can control when they block out time on their calendar that's listed as available dates, they could block off everything except August. We don't know why they blocked it off, whether it's rented or whether they're not renting it at that point. It's just not available if you go on there to try to make a reservation.
So for now, I think we're getting a little bit in the weeds. Chris has floated one idea. Let's hear what other ideas we have. So Chris has floated an idea of making it an easier licensure process for something that's really minimally rented. It sounds like there'd be some challenges in that, but where's the rest of the board right now? And is Chris accurate in saying, and I think he is, that none of us are talking about making it more restrictive. So it seems like the question is, do we stay the course or do we open the door in some way? So what are people's thoughts on that? And then our direction to staff would be come back to us with a process and a time frame for exploring our options if we decide to open the door more. Erica.
Well, I think it's also the other, and I appreciate, Kate, that you're here kind of representing the restaurant business. But I know, being on the chamber board, hearing from Alegria owner Benoit regularly saying how he's noticing a decline in kind of people who are staying here overnight is reducing his business. And then even when we were going through the original regulation discussion, we had Ally come and testify in support of short-term rentals, understanding, and she was the owner of the Batch at the time, just understanding the importance of visitors and how really our Carbondale residents, we can't support the restaurants that we love in town. We do not eat enough or drink enough, despite our best efforts, I'm sure. And so just really acknowledging that like the things we love about Carbondale, for those business owners to keep them open, do rely on visitors. And so I think that's a reality that I really think we need to take seriously when we're hearing from restaurant owners. And I did email Benoit and I didn't get a chance to hear back from him because I'm sure he's busy running a restaurant. And then I also remember hearing from Eric, the owner of Fat Thai, also saying the same thing. Like he got up and said, I need housing for my employees, but I have to make sure we have visitors here. And so I think what we're seeing is that our regulations worked. We didn't have a crazy runaway speculative market. But I'm definitely open to reevaluating some of our restrictions. I definitely don't want us to get more strict. And I'm really open to changing that it doesn't have to be your primary property and having that discussion. We have in our regulations that, one of the ways that we were preventing the speculative buying was that you have to own the property for a full year before you can rent it out. And that kind of prevents somebody from purchasing the property and then just turning it into a short-term rental. So we could potentially keep that, but it could be, so it's somebody built, have it as a second home and then they turn it into a short-term rental. And then I'd be open to changing our rules on more than one, because I know we have a couple properties that are in there and I just can't remember those rules. But because the other, I think, reality is short-term rentals in general are lessening, like just bookings. We don't have as many people traveling. I think when we put these regulations into place, let's call it that revenge tourism or whatever people were calling it, where people were just going nuts and visiting us like crazy. That's not happening anymore. So I just think that's a reality. And then there are quite a few of the 30 or month-to-month rentals, kind of the opening it up to seasonal workers. I have a family member who does that in her home, and it kind of skirts the, like, she didn't have to get a short-term rental license. She's providing housing for like traveling nurses, but it's kind of this interesting gray area, and I don't want us to regulate that, but I just want to acknowledge that that's not workforce housing for somebody who's here full-time either. And so there's I don't know if these regulations, these 35 homes, even the 71 that we had, those were not necessarily going to be rental units for workforce housing anyway. So I'm willing to kind of discuss and look at how we change our regulations to have some more short-term rentals. I like maybe the zone caps that we look at in different zone districts or something. And we might not decide all that tonight, but I'm open to changing what we have in place.
Okay, Lauren.
Nothing, I was just going to say, if we do want to expand the reach of our regulations, there are a number of ways to do it. It could be caps by zone, it could be caps by town, that we allow a broader range, but once we hit 105, then there aren't any more until that drops back down.
That's
and,
what your rate
those
does.
kinds of things.
Yeah.
So there are lots of different options.
Yeah, I think that I would like to explore an option like that.
And, for the record, we did explore all those options and we did look at every single other town in Colorado and we had a huge matrix. And so I don't want it to be anybody's impression that we just sort of went it alone on this. We very deliberately and carefully researched what was out there. And now we've got 2 years of data and experience to improve it and tweak it and make it, fit better. And so the Colorado Association of Ski Towns cast, of which we're a member, has done an incredible amount of research on this. So it's very easy for us to now pull up a whole matrix of what everybody's doing and look at towns that are similar to us. And, without going back to the drawing board and maybe just focus in on our goal was to have some sort of cap. And this was one way of getting there. And maybe it's another form of that. Jess, you look like you've got thoughts.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what was said where the long-term rental price is almost gonna be even or outweigh a short-term rental. And I think that we talk all the time about affordable housing and workforce housing. And I think these homes that we're talking about maybe being short-term rentals can be rented out for like $6,000 or $7,000 a month as long-term rentals. And so the reality is that we can't cap those prices. And so are we really creating more affordable housing, or are we just creating possible long-term rental situations that, I don't know, I don't think that we're going to solve the affordable housing crisis by restricting short-term rentals. And I know that was a big concern in 2022 when people came in and said, like, this is eating up long-term workforce housing rentals. And I think that we're seeing that that's not really the case. And I sat on the chamber board before I was elected, and now am a liaison to the chamber board. And it is hard to run a small business in this town, and the restaurants are absolutely being affected. And the chamber and the tourism council have shifted their outreach, and it is take it easy, and they are trying not to push tourism like come to Carbondale anymore. It's all about sustainability of the tourism. And I think we may see a pendulum swing wildly with that as well. So I know that if I had family coming, they would have nowhere to rent, and they're not going to stay at the Comfort Inn and the Days Inn. And I've had family come from California to visit, and they stay in Willits. And so I would be for sure open to loosening up the restrictions. I'm open to removing the primary residence regulation. I just don't think it's quite the problem that we thought it would be. And I don't think that it creates solutions that we were looking for by regulating it.
Okay, thanks, Jess. Other thoughts on kind of next steps, Christina?
Thank y'all, everybody who came in for comments. I believe I've had my family host for a graduation at Mr. Hunt's place. And for the record, Comfort Inn and Days Inn, I'm a little, I feel bad for them because I think my family has stayed there and I think I've stayed there overnight before too. So, I mean, I think we're giving them a hard time. They're a business and I think, I don't know, I mean, I feel like I send my family members over there and they're happily here for a quinceañera or a wedding and they're good there and there's always been reservation there. But with that said, yeah, it's no Hoffman, but okay. I was leaning on staying on course, but after hearing small business, you know, I'm a big believer in small business. I feel like we should do something with the regulations, but I also feel to preserve our small town and some issues that I hear from constituents is we should also, if we are gonna open up to secondary, we should cap. Right now, we're at about 1% of housing that we're, you know, if we're at 35 and 2,600, we're at 1%. I would say though, cap it to 2%. At least. And if that helps by, you know, it's just now it's what regulation is gonna help that and not really exceed and then be out of control again.
Okay, but Christina, what I'm hearing you say is you're open to a discussion and to explore some options to expand short-term rentals carefully within some limits.
Yep.
Okay. Other thoughts on next steps?
I'd like to just echo what everybody said. When we started along this path, my approach was, we don't know what we don't know. So now we know. And 70 didn't seem that big, or 50, whatever the number was. And now it seems like 35 is maybe a little too small. I think we're not going to get a lodge anytime soon. And this creates a diversity of options for folks. And we've all stayed in VRBOs, Airbnbs, and they're great. And we've all stayed in hotels and they've been great. And it just creates a lot of options for us. So I'm really open to exploring. I think we got what we wanted. Now we know how many we have. And now we can explore how do we change our regulations to, you know, make it more viable for folks.
Okay, thanks, Colin.
I don't need to go far. I just wanted to not dismiss outright Chris's idea of a 30-day option. Like because I certainly would be in that category of like, hey, I'd love to go to North Carolina for 3 weeks. A mini license, yeah. And maybe I don't want to jump through, and that's a jumping through hoops hurdle, you know, more than anything else. And a good way to, I think, to encourage funkiness and people who, like, I think there's part of it is the aesthetic. I think what we're talking to is like, yeah, the people who want to come here want to kind of embrace the culture and embrace our downtown. And I think to whatever extent people who are here and are going on a vacation want to open up their homes to that does speak to sort of the original vibe of Airbnb. And we should, if there's some way to do it, I can't imagine there isn't software that sort of can dig into that and somewhat regulate it. And at the same time, if it's a leap of faith, you know, and we have a 1% people who take advantage of it, you know, either their neighbors tell us and we deal with it, or, you know, we just see, you know, I don't think I trust most people.
Well, one solution to that, if we were to open it up to non-primary property owners, maybe there's 2 tiers. There's this isn't your primary property, so this is the level of the fee or whatever. And then if it is in your primary property, then that's this light application to encourage that opening up your bedroom or your house when you go on vacation. That could be one way. I don't know.
We already do have a difference in fees.
Yeah.
If it's your principal residence or if it's not.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it sounds like we need to find some agenda time to dig into this deeper. It sounds like there's a majority of the board supports opening the door to some more short-term rental licenses that are not people's primary residence. I would advise that we keep it as simple as possible, that we don't get into really different regulations all over town or proximity. I would advise that we do something just like there's an unlimited number of, if it's your primary residence, and then we're capping the others. We're capping the non-primary residents, and we're looking at what should that number be. And leaving it at that. I think we have a system that's been fairly easy to manage so far. I don't think with our limited staff, we want to add a lot of complexity to that. I think the idea of looking at a different type of license, I'm open to that. And I think maybe a starting point could be, let's hear from our town clerk about the current licensing process, the difference between a primary residence and a non-primary residence license, and see what we think. See if there's somewhere, do we really want to get rid of the inspection? I don't know. I'd like to hear from staff on that. Do we want to make it a no license thing or a no fee thing if it's down to a certain amount? Are we comfortable kind of subsidizing the staff time for that? So I think we can consider that, but it sounds like the bigger issue is we're open to supporting our local businesses by expanding the amount of options that people have to stay here. So we'll find some agenda time for that. Anything else for the good of this topic before we take a quick break and move on to the last one?
Yeah, occasionally we run into the tenant or the short-term rental person who has maybe wanted to stay 28 days. And we throw out, well, if you stay 30 days, you don't have to pay this tax, and it's gonna be a lot cheaper. So something to keep in mind.
If I remember correctly, I think there are limits. I think that there's housing law limitations on our ability to regulate things 30 days or more. Like, I think that's
on the state level too.
yeah, I think it's kind of like, you can't get into that too much. So
Yeah.
you can kind of do what you want with short-term rentals, but once it's over that, it is kind of like, yeah, it is outside this and it's between landlord and tenant, and that's so that people have fair access to housing. So
Sounds like a great incentive to rent your place for 30 days.
it does.
It works.
Okay. Yep. Okay.
Just one quick one. Wasn't trying to throw Comfort Inn and Days Inn under the bus. The reality is their pricing during the summer is sort of predatory. So I think those lodging options with more competition could actually promote more people being able to afford to stay in Carbondale if we had other options available that sort of set that market correct. Because if you look at some of their peak season pricing, it's as expensive as like a 4 or 5 star hotel.
It's almost the same as the Hoffman, I think. And the Hoffman is brand new, has food and beverage on site. So that's sort of what I'm talking about too, is that the Hoffman is like a completely different experience from Comfort Inn and Days Inn. And they're charging the same prices because there's no competition.
Okay. All right. Clear?
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much for the input. Let's take a quick 5-minute break while we get our last group settled in to present to us on the geothermal project. Hopefully they'll be all ready to screen share and all that by the time that we get back.
So I'm gonna do it again so that you I did it right in the right. But it should ask you.
I don't know how that works, but I there's some magic to that.
It turns, yeah. I would agree.
Yes. Hotel on the hybrid is amazing. So that's the particular. Yeah. Well, I mean, good for them. Honestly, for being ahead of the game and like they're the guy who owns the HOA.
Owns the HOA.
What?
That's what he said. Owns the HOA.
I know.
Did you say owns the HOA?
I thought you said.
Oh, no, he runs the HOA. He owns it. No, he did a good job. Yeah. No, I noticed. I mean, I would say whatever. Summarize things. There are a few times when I would say, we shouldn't. That can be creativity. You know, like we just because we kind of know how it works right now doesn't mean we shouldn't be required to advocate for something much better. I mean, it might be the thinking that what seems complex financially is actually a better way. Exactly the same. It just takes a little work to get there. But then exactly. So I want to but I'll think through it. We shouldn't say we don't want to do complex stuff. No, exactly. But I mean, maybe it is learning curve. So great, but if it serves something, you know, we shouldn't dismiss it because we know what we're kind of doing. You know, because I think there's some creative solutions that someone had to do it the way that we were doing it now the first time. Or encourage for that. Like again, hey, we're looking for people. Like we can do if that's what the chamber wants to do. We're encouraging people to do this new thing that we set up. You know, right?
And that's fine.
Right, and that's fine, yeah. I just listen. I have two different families hoping to stay in my house. I have two different families hoping to stay in my house. Yeah, that was literally the example I was thinking of. I was like, I would rent a bedroom. But I can't advertise it. Right.
No, exactly. No, exactly. Yeah, I think that's.
And I'm not gonna go to the office, right, for like 2 weekends. Yeah. And I just, my house was built in 2019. I didn't do it, but I'm still, I don't want them
So that's the worst part. That's sad.
Can they tent back there? Can we just put up tents? No, I'm saying like, what's the laws about like just
Oh, just to
letting
put the
people?
tents?
Yeah, like they could camp. Yeah. You could tent back
There
here.
is like an Airbnb for that didn't go very far.
Well, I think you see on this. Vendors and nothing there. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
It's sold out.
Yeah.
No, they're like desperately.
Maybe we need to send a downtowner to Comfort Inn and Days Inn and bus them into Main Street. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Maybe send the downtown.
Maybe we need to put flyers.
John, Lauren, do we need more time to set up technology?
We are close.
Okay. I thought that break would take care of it. It always seems to be this way. It's amazing.
And I just made you a panelist, so watch for it on your.
I'm like so excited for this next part.
There you go. Now you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Check that mic, John, just push it so that one needs to be green.
One needs to be green and one needs to be red.
I know.
We'll share one green. Hi, everyone. My name is John Fox Rubin, and I'm here with Lawrence Serbier from Clear. And our goal is to brief you on the Carbondale Community Geothermal Coalition status and update. Welcome, new trustees, and thank you for your service.
Absolutely.
You'll say something? Okay, so sorry, I wanted to stand and walk around. I'm one of those people who likes
He's
to
like a
move.
lecturer. Probably carry that around. That's one of the cordless
Gonna try to
ones.
sit still. So this is a project that the community won in October. It's a one-year design and feasibility grant from the U.S. Department of Energy through the Geothermal Technology Office, and it's part of their Community Geothermal Initiative. They selected 11 awardees, 4 were rural. They're on the slides here. Carbondale is one of them. It's bold at the top. And the coalition that we put together includes the town of Carbondale, the 3rd Street Center, the Roaring Fork School District, the Carbondale Branch Library of Garfield County, and 20 individual townhomes next to 3rd Street Center. The goals of DOE are to help the country decarbonize its energy and its heating and cooling systems. And this is part of a program that has $30 million of additional funding for deployment. So it's not just, hey, go design something really neat and see if you can figure out how to fund it. It's go design something really neat, and then we're going to have a competitive down select with those other 10 awardees. And that $30 million will be divided among 1 or N of those others, most likely 4 to 5, but it's still up to award committee that makes that decision. So as one of 4 awardees, we're sanguine that we have a high chance of success to win ongoing funding. We're now 9 months through this design phase, and we've got some preliminary results that are pretty exciting. We'll share a little bit of that with you tonight. It's notable that 2 of the other rural areas, one's remote, way up in a remote part of Alaska, and the other one's in a small town in Alaska called Seward. And then there's one in Vermont as well, and one in Oklahoma that would be in the rural designation that we're kind of competing with. The way DOA's set it up is it's collaborative. We have quarterly collaborative meetings where we share what we're learning, and we all know that it's kind of in an academic, cordial environment. So the ultimate goal is to replicate these kind of systems throughout the country to meet the nation's goals and local goals and state goals. We've been very fortunate that the Colorado Energy Office has just awarded CLEAR 2 additional grants to support this specific project. One is a business development grant that looks at the different ownership models and the different structures that need to be developed in terms of how you own and operate community thermal energy systems. Lauren's the project lead on that grant. And then the other grant is a deployment phase grant that will count as part of our cost share. If we prevail in the next phase of funding, the community has to come up with 10% of the cost and the government will cover 90%. That's very rare for US government. Usually cost shares are more like 50%, and they really want, industry. But because of the goals of this community geothermal project, one of them actually says they want you to go and retrofit old existing buildings. Like that's one of the goals of this project. And when you see the buildings we've selected, you'll see, wow, we're going to hit the sweet spot there. When if you haven't spent any time in the 3rd Street Center, we're paying a lot of attention to its basement. That was a bomb shelter when it was built as a school. And it turns out it's going to be a great mechanical room for the system. So we're meeting a lot of the criteria of the Department of Energy is the overview on that. There's more slides in your packet, but I think we're just going to go over a few slides tonight so we can have conversation and have some dialogue here. So this slide is one that we developed for the original proposal, and it talks about the 2 different phases. We're in that design and feasibility phase that I mentioned earlier. Had no cost share. That's a nice feature of that. I will say that CLEAR has put in a lot of resource in addition to the funding. $716,000 sounds like a lot, but we hired Gray Edge Group, which is one of the world's leading thermal energy network contractors. We also partnered with NREL on our proposal. NREL has a very high cost burden. When you look at dollars per hour per their staff, it's quite high because they have to amortize this huge organization. So not all that money is going to CLEAR. CLEAR is sharing it. Third Street Center is a small subcontractor on the project. The next phase starts it says on the slide, starts in November of 2024. That's when Department of Energy starts making their decision. They won't actually decide on the awardees probably till December of 2024. And then we would be implementing in 2025 and potentially into 2026. And you'll see on the chart there, that's a little Gantt chart of, where we were maybe a month or so ago on the different projects. The schematic there shows the different buildings. It's a 16-acre campus. The Third Street Center, many people in the community think it's a net zero building because it is net zero electric, but they don't comprehend that a big part of its energy footprint is the gas that heats it all winter long. And that's about 80% of its overall energy use. And so how do we take old existing buildings that still have tremendous usable life and decarbonize them? That's essentially what this project is doing with Third Street Center as the focal point. When we were originally looking at the district, we looked at, could we do this entire district, including the library and the school district, which has a mix of older buildings that have been renovated and ones that have not been renovated, and then relatively new housing. And we scaled back the initial deployment to just be the Third Street Center plus those townhomes. The Department of Energy wants to see mixed use in these thermal energy networks because you get extra bang for your investment buck when you have residential piggybacking on commercial because of the time of use. You're turning on the heat at night when you come home from work, right when Third Street Center staff are leaving. And so that gives a synergy and improves the system efficiency as well. When I say synergy, it means, one capital cost that can be amortized over more users and more units. So that's what we've been focused on in the design phase. We will be submitting an application September 30th. There are some other goals in the grant around workforce development because they know parts of this country don't have mature geothermal installers. They don't have a mature drilling and infrastructure workforce. And that's certainly true in parts of Colorado. Like we're going to have 3 different drillers that are going to be bidding on this. They're highly scheduled to get to charge premium pricing. And because we can't commit today to them, they're kind of, we're in there, sure, we'll do it, but they're going to tell us when's convenient for them to do the drilling. There's an innovative driller out of Austin, Texas that drills slightly deeper that can do it faster, and they'll be one of the bidders as well. So when we get to the final and make a decision, we might be able to pull in and help pull along a new entrant into the space. That's a venture capital backed drilling company that seems like a really good fit for these types of installations. I'm going to skip ahead to. Sorry, go ahead.
I think that it would be good to talk about the benefit of the technology, and this is our, so we've presented to council before and also did an open house on April 24th. So for those of you who have heard this, please forgive us, but we thought it might be good to review it with the new trustee members. So just a quick little bit of background. I think I'll let John talk about the technology, but also why this site and why we're interested in using connected ground source heat pumps to create a thermal energy network for meeting Carbondale's decarbonization goals. This was really the impetus for the project and the project's location. So the energy action plan and past Mayor Richardson and past trustees have also looked at this part of town as being one of several identified areas in Carbondale that it might be feasible to create a net zero energy district. So I just wanted to take a quick step back in time there for the baseline. And then even a little bit further back and just to look at the state's role in geothermal in general, and that would be ground source, so connected ground source heat pumps, which is what we're looking at, thermal energy networks, and then also high temperature. So you'll hear people talk about geothermal to electricity.
I just wanted to clarify, this is low temperature, relatively low depth boreholes that are connected ground source heat pumps together to serve multiple buildings. We're not talking about high temperature electricity generation. So that's a little bit of the background of what we're talking about. And then specifically, geothermal creates this really exciting opportunity because as we electrify, move to air source heat pumps, we are really just trying to get more base load reduction in the grid so that more and more renewable energy can be this major source of power in the grid. And at this point in time, this is one of the few technological options that we have to truly get off gas. And we're in very early stages, I would say, in the industry. As John just noted, the competition for drillers is low. We have really only a handful of engineering firms that you would hire to do this kind of work. So it's really exciting. And I would say we're just really proud that Carbondale took on the project and that you've been listening to us so far. So back to the future here.
Thank you, Lauren. So as Lauren mentioned, we're using ground source heat pumps. And in general, ground source heat pumps are twice as thermodynamically efficient as air source heat pumps. And air source heat pumps are kind of the easy thing to do to electrify our buildings. However, if we electrify all of our buildings in Carbondale with air source heat pumps, the grid has a big demand on it and it'll need to expand. And that's incredibly capital intensive. So when we look 50 years in the future and try to work backwards, anywhere where we can do it more efficiently with ground source heat pumps will delay that capital expense. And it's a little different than, say, vehicle electrification, which also has a grid impact, but you can really manage when electric vehicles are charged. And usually they can be charged during off-peak times if you start having peak management scenarios. And geothermal loops like we're talking about that are using ambient temperature water. So that just means we're using water that's 56 degrees, which is basically the ambient temperature of the earth on average year round. That's what we're circulating to be the fluid that we exchange energy in and out of with the heat pump. So it still uses electricity, but it just uses it in a much more efficient way. There's one slide in your packet that kind of gives that analogy here. So these are scenarios. This is if the whole country was electrified. All the buildings in the country were electrified. And if they were all using baseboard electric heat, that's a coefficient of performance of 1, because essentially all the electricity that's going through your resistive heater creates heat. And that's, everyone's probably seen those from the 70s. Hopefully there aren't too many of those in Carbondale today. And then air source heat pumps on average have basically double that efficiency. And then ground source heat pumps by themselves, another doubling over that. And then if you network ground source heat pumps, that's what we're aiming for with this small pilot installation, a coefficient of performance of around 6. Unless you think this is magic, it's not. Colorado Mesa University has a campus that started this in 2008, and they're running coefficients of performance up near 7 and 8 because over time they have learned a lot with their system, and they don't have to drill as many holes per new building that they're adding because the buildings actually share a lot of loads. You know, one part of a building is cooling and another part of the building is heating. They're not going out to the ground source loop. They're just sharing within their heat pumps. So it's just electricity taking energy out of water and putting it into the building, or doing the opposite to cool the building. So it's an elegant way without brand new technology, where it's really systems engineering that helps us get there. And unfortunately, capital cost is very high for these systems. And that's why we're trying to leverage the federal investment to get it started. And then subsequent additions to the system can be much more affordable because we've already put in the main pumping systems and the main bore field. We're also exploring adding on some solar. There's already some solar thermal on the 3rd Street building, but it's not working. We can augment the system by adding a little bit of heat from a solar system that can capture energy all day long, all summer, and basically store it in the ground for the winter. And that's going to be an innovation that we think DOE will be very happy with. Even though it's the Geothermal Technology Office, they're looking for innovations to make these systems more elegant and more efficient. And then back to one thing Lauren said is, we're decarbonizing radically here, but we're not actually going to get rid of the gas lines to the Third Street Center. Third Street Center recently invested in new boilers. Those boilers can serve as a backup. So we have redundancy and safety. And, Third Street Center already serves as a pretty important community center. Making it more resilient will help the community over time for other future things such as wildfires and other unanticipated things. So there's a lot of benefits if we focus on this opportunity to leverage federal funds, bring it here, and kind of be seen as a regional leader here, because we're ahead of all of the other municipalities in Colorado looking at this. The state of Colorado is trying to foster similar programs throughout Colorado, and they're going to invest $12 million over the next few years to do so. And a couple of other regions like Pickens County won a grant. Let's see, Town of Vale won a grant from them. They're basically in the planning phase. And their challenge is going to be, how do they amortize their large investment and recover it? We think we're going to have a nice advantage in cost recovery here, that the community is getting this 10-to-1 leverage from the feds. And that's why we think it's worth pursuing.
I'd like to say that Colin could basically be giving this presentation if he would like to, because he's been a really critical part of the Third Street Center team and helping us troubleshoot the engineering at the building, looking at system design, and Ben as well from the school district. So we see this as a collaborative effort, and it's just really a next step building on leadership that's already been happening for decades. Thanks to those guys. But
so this last slide just kind of tells you where we're at. So we're identifying how we would retrofit the main buildings. There's a preliminary design for Third Street Center that's got an internal water loop, and the townhome retrofits. We've come up with a really elegant way to make it easy for the owners to not be burdened by a cumbersome retrofit where we'd have to tear into their house a whole lot. And that is, we're looking at a high efficiency, it's called a carbon dioxide heat pump that uses carbon dioxide as its working fluid. That would be based in the Third Street Center basement and then send hot water over to these townhomes. So it's a kind of a hybrid system. We're using ambient temperature water to share and exchange with the ground, but then we're bumping up the heat so that it can go right into the existing heating systems, which are radiators in those townhomes. And the downside is it doesn't come with cooling, but it's the most elegant way to provide the heating. And the Department of Energy's goal here is the maximum decarbonization, willing to invest in older infrastructure. But when we started looking at the real implications of putting ground source heat pumps in each individual townhome, their electrical systems are 40 years old. They're not to code. We can't add anything without kind of compromising the safety of those units. And this way, we're just plugging right into their existing heating system. And many of their boilers are very old. And so it's actually going to be a compelling reason for them to upgrade without compromising the safety of these older boilers. A few of them have already replaced their boilers. But we think it's an equitable way to treat, some of the, I would call these affordable by design units. You wouldn't think they're affordable if you had to buy one today, but many of them still serve as primary housing, or they're rented for long-term rentals. So we feel like it's kind of meeting the town goals around equity as well. Maybe we should pause because I know we're getting near the end of the evening for you, and
we could keep going, but
we can go forever.
I think maybe if you just want to touch on the questions that we're not going to answer tonight, but that we're eventually going to need to grapple with around the ownership models and what role the town might play. I mean, I think tonight's a good opportunity to bring people up to speed, ask questions, go home and Google ground source heat pumps. And, we all just need to build our background knowledge on this over time, and to kind of preview what's ahead. So you said end of September, you need to apply for the grant. And I think we'll probably have another discussion before then.
Yeah, it might be good to circle back with you with our preliminary design that we plan to go, right now we're trying to find general contractors who would bid on this and partner with us to present it to Department of Energy. We plan to partner with a GC, and there's a mechanical component, there's an electrical component, there's an excavating component. There is probably going to be some resurfacing and some other pieces. So we're going to be pulling together a comprehensive budget. And in terms of ownership and operation, there are a number of models that we're exploring right now. The feds actually are interested in seeing the diversity of options out there. Some states have a highly regulated utility environment already that forces utilities to essentially provide heat if they are already providing electricity and or gas. Colorado is more like the Wild West when it comes to regulation. And we are working with the one utility that's very interested in thermal energy networks, which is Holy Cross. However, we're not in their service area. The service area is Xcel Energy and Black Hills Energy. And it's unlikely that either of them, although it's still possible, more possible that Xcel might say, yes, we would want to pilot this. The options that we're exploring include community ownership, partners. The town of Carbondale is the primary owner, and we're looking at ways that we can reduce the risk for the different ownership. But the beauty is the payback from the operation of this is probably going to be more like 10 to 20 years, which is relatively short for a utility or a capital investment of this nature. And then after that, it really can expand. So stay tuned, and we're going to be working with staff a bit on this and outside partners. One of our grants has some, legal research funds in it to help us map out ownership and operation agreements.
Okay.
Anything you'd add on top of that?
I would say to clarify, so the Energy Office grant, we're just getting going on the business model work. There is a lot of change happening in the policy regulatory space right now, so we're tracking that. But we'd really, love the trustees' blessing for us to go ahead and have a few scoping meetings with staff as part of the business model research that we're doing to look at what it would take to own this or to consider owning it, bringing it back at a subsequent meeting or 2 or 3. By September 30th, we need a letter of support from 1 or even possibly 2 entities as option A and option B that are willing to continue on the journey with us to getting to signing on the dot ownership. We also are going to be looking at fundraising for the gap funding that we have for this project. So we want to be very upfront about that. We are getting bids right now, and the Energy Office is paying some money, the federal government's paying some money, and we are likely to have a gap of $300,000 to $400,000 on the project, which could be recovered or will definitely be recovered by whoever pays that fund from the rate from the owners of the system. So instead of paying Black Hills, you'll pay the owner of the thermal energy network. So all cards are on the table now, but I foresee in the next 2 months, we're going to have to pretty quickly get to, this is the preferred option and the secondary option to be competitive with DOE.
Great,
Yeah.
thanks. So that's what's ahead of us. Questions and or feedback on kind of I think one thing that they're probably looking for is like, how enthusiastic are we about this? Because we may be asked for either a funding contribution or taking it on long-term as another utility in the town. We don't have to make either of those decisions tonight, but our level of interest will probably influence those decisions. So questions, feedback.
This is really freaking exciting. Really great job. Thanks for the presentation. I like the 101 reminder of how geothermal works. I think it's good for us to be reminded of that. So thanks for the great presentation.
Thank you.
I think as we think about or go home and think about kind of the ownership models that get presented to us, I think it's good to remember that the Third Street Center is a Carbondale owned building. This is kind of for the newbies too. We also, the town of Carbondale owns the solar array on top, we purchased it from a third party, that how it got built with a power purchase agreement. And so the town owns the solar as well. So we're kind of already in this like little bit of owning some energy that the Third Street Center benefits from as a nonprofit. And I'm pointing to Colin just, but you're not wearing your Third Street Center hat right now. And then we own all of the land around the Third Street Center as parkland, and that's not Third Street Center land. So I just think it starts to, for me, it starts to get really logical that we would potentially be the owners. And so when I was looking through all the materials of just thinking through, and I'm just planting the seed now, even if we don't decide tonight or give any direction, that to me, it's not out of the realm that we would be the owners and maybe we have somebody else operating it and there's a third party operator if we don't feel like we have that capacity, or if it's, I don't know how complicated it is. But I just think this is an amazing asset that the town of Carbondale owns. And we have the Third Street Center stepping up and really managing it, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility of us owning it. And I've always been, from my time at Clear, working on energy, excited about the idea of a town becoming kind of adding to their utilities of either providing electricity. It's been discussed before my time on the board of like us, asking Holy Cross to take over Xcel Energy territory. That question was raised. Or even can Carbondale become its own electric utility and take over running utilities from Holy Cross and Xcel? So this isn't a like brand new concept, and this is the first time that people on this side of the table have talked about whether that should be something that we pursue or consider. So to me, I think all options are on the table. I'm really open to us being the owners.
Okay, thanks, Erica. Other feedback or questions?
I just
Jess?
had some feedback. I love that you guys are thinking about resiliency and not pulling the gas line out of the building, especially because the building serves as emergency, like an emergency space. Where if we lose electricity in the town or there's a fire or something like that, I think it's really smart to have redundancy. So I love that. And they're new boilers, so it seems silly to look at pulling them out. So I love that. I think it's a really exciting project. I think that geothermal is a better long-term solution than solar. And I think for a long time, people have been looking at solar as like, that's the way to go. And I don't think that that's super true anymore. And so I think it's smart. And how cool is it that we have the Third Street Center and the library and the school district housing and regular housing, and it's all so close together. We have open space and parking lots that we can do these borings. And like, I just think it's a really cool way for Carbondale to sort of step forward and be an example. Because I think a lot of what we see, especially in the construction industry, is like everybody's trying to be a leader and everybody's doing it now, like in energy codes and things like that. But this is like an actual, this is really stepping forward. And to say that you got the grant from the DOE and that there's possibility for a huge match from them to actually deploy it is incredible. So I'm on board with Erica.
Chris?
I'll just say that I don't think it's mutually exclusive with solar. Obviously, solar is part of this, and it's a good way to leverage solar in a positive way. Again, I'm like 110%, whatever, 1,000% on board with this. I guess I'm just really excited about the longer term possibilities around this. What is the depth at which you get to that 56-degree level?
We did one test borehole that's 450 feet deep. And so that 50, and I think it's like 59.5 degrees, that's the average temperature if you're sending water down a closed loop, it goes all the way down and comes back up. That's what it'll average out at. we have a little bit of interesting, I guess it's like 80 feet down, 80 to 100 feet down. There's some porous rocks that have gentle water flowing through them. And that's actually favorable because it helps whisk away some of the energy. And so it's basically just the average of if you integrate it over that time period. And we'll learn more as we put in more boreholes, but it's very favorable for the kinds of systems that Gray Edge has built in the past.
Do you have any is there any understanding of where you get kind of close to that? Like, I guess I'm curious, I know there are some versions of these ground source systems that do trenching instead of boring, right?
Right, yep.
And I guess I would be really excited about, you know, in the long run, you know, say we have to dig up a sewer main or something running down 3rd Street. Do we have the opportunity at that point to say, we're digging this thing up? We have a plan in place. Let's put the tubing in here. Now we can plug all the houses on that street into the system in the future. Or the ideal thing would be to try to aim for the pool in the long run. And then if you had that distance over, you know, a long street and you're running it back and forth, maybe you're creating the same sort of network effects in the long run but with the bores as your sort of core thing, I guess. And you may not have to drill as many bores if you're going long distances underground horizontally as opposed to just vertically.
Well, correct.
Yeah, those are all correct. You know, the ambient loop itself is 14 inches in diameter. So it's got a ton of thermal inertia in it. And that gives you like quick response time, and it doesn't have to go down to that borehole as often, the bigger that loop is. So that's part of that initial capital investment. We are designing it to be able to connect south because there's the middle school on one side and there's Ross on the other side. So it's designed to be upgradable. And I think it would take a while to get to downtown, and you would still need some horizontal holes downtown. Like say you wanted to do the new town center. It's quite possible that it could have its own independent thermal network, and then they get tied in over time to build redundancy and increase the system efficiency.
Yeah, okay. I guess I'm also just sort of thinking about it in the context of our pool. We're dealing with a value engineering that system, and part of the problem with this thing is we're having to build a big building because we're having to do air source heat pumps, which are using a lot of space, which is adding a lot of project costs to that. And if there was some way to make a plan to say that we're going to put off the spa part of the project until we can get the ground source down to there, then we build a smaller building and initially cut the costs on that project potentially and put that into this, project in the long run. And then I know your network also says bodies of waters can be potentially valuable to moderating your network as well. I don't know.
Okay.
Food for thought.
Lots of thoughts. Other thoughts, feedback, questions?
Just kudos for a really impressive presentation. And I think, at some point we have to let smart people do their thing, and you have to do that with confidence. And I don't have any lack of confidence whatsoever. And the enthusiasm is just a bonus. So I can't wait to see kind of where this goes next. And just another note of how great a project the 3rd Street Center is, and an example of great adaptive reuse and thinking ahead and not demolishing structures because we think that they are not perfect for our needs at the moment, and fighting for structures that maybe could be used elsewhere or could be used in other ways, thinking creatively, not necessarily taking the easiest course or the least complex course, but being open to creative folks with creative ideas. That started, I think, with the 3rd Street Center, and I think this is a continuation of that philosophy. And I think larger and sort of on the larger scale just sort of really speaks to, I think, the best of Carbondale, which is trying to be a little bit cutting edge when we can be, and when it really fits us. And in this case, we've got some geologic blessings that sort of have knocked on our door as well. But thank you so much.
Any other thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, Erica.
Well, I wanted to bring up the funding question, because maybe it could be helpful for research for next time we talk about it. My understanding is that we do have some funds in our own REMP fund where people pay in lieu of adding solar. And I don't know the balance. I don't know if you know that, Lauren, but we can research that. I feel like it's right around $80,000. I'm sure that's our 10%, right? No, I'm just kidding. But I just think that fund is currently not doing anything, and this feels like a really logical use for us to put, at least look at where that funding is and start to think about it. I know the ask is potentially for more, but I just wanted to bring up that that's something that we should look at, is what's in that fund as a starting point, at least. So I just wanted to raise that.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot of enthusiastic support from this board. You know, I would still proceed with caution. I think that the town has to be careful about what we take on as far as long-term ownership and operation of a new utility that may have a really long payback even for that 10% match or whatever we end up being asked for. So I think it's a good idea to start talking to staff about that. I think we tend to listen to staff recommendations on things like that. So we'll take, you know, their concerns seriously, and we are in the utility business, so it might be a really good fit. But I think that question will really take some analysis and discussion. And then I like your idea, Erica, of looking for funds that are kind of earmarked for energy in some way. We don't really have a lot of that, so it's good to remember the maybe small fund that we do have. And otherwise, you know, our meeting in early August, we're going to be talking about kind of budget priorities, and we're going to want to do it all. And everything's expensive. We're going to want to do a lot of crossings of the highway that we kind of committed to last week, and affordable housing that we can't afford over here, and a big pool project that's getting under construction, and staff wage increases, and maybe adding some capacity to staff. And this comes in the midst of all that. And so that's just, you know, that's what public service is making those decisions, and you can't always do it all. But I guess I don't feel like we're quite there yet. It's not a slam dunk for me, but I think it's a thing to keep exploring and working together on. You know, one question I have is you mentioned about the kind of different approach to the townhomes, but how engaged have folks that live there been, and what's their kind of role in this? Because it seems like a pretty critical part of phase one. And I like that you've chosen a tough project, because it would be a lot easier to do a greenfield project and it's all one tenant and whatever. But how are those discussions? What do those look like?
I think we could do better. We've had some good conversations. I think now that we've got a design and we've got a, you know, like this recent approach came through our mechanical engineering firm giving us 3 suboptimal options, and us just thinking, wow, John Fox Rubin doesn't want to bring these over there and try to sell these. Can we go back to the drawing board? And so the design team was just like, oh, how about this? So it's been slow to come up with what I think is an elegant solution. Ask me in another month and a half.
If I went and knocked on all their doors, how many of them would say they know what the geothermal network is right now?
They all know what it is.
Okay.
I wouldn't say all of them. I mean, we've done multiple outreach, we've done door knocking, we've invited them to things, mailings.
Okay.
We've tried to get some of them to get energy audits so they know where they're at today. I wouldn't call it a highly engaged community because they're individually owned. Many of them are absentee landlords, and so the people living there are the tenants. We're trying to talk to all. You know, we want the owner to know about it, but we also want the tenant to know about it, because you know, some of the tenants might be talking about, you know, one of them said, oh, I've never been too hot in my unit, and they're in a middle unit, and the other person in the middle unit's like, oh my gosh, it's boiling, I've got a swamp cooler up there. So, you know, it's cultural. You know, someone's like, I'm used to warm weather. This is cool from where but to be honest, it's not an easy task.
Yeah.
Clear's probably as adept as anyone in creating those conversations.
Great.
And in some ways, it's a microcosm of the entire town. How do we engage homeowners who already are like this with expenses to upgrade something that they don't really have to upgrade? So how do we help them do that? And I think that gets into the ownership discussion, because will a utility help us do that in the way we would like to see it happen? Or do we want to find ways to make that? So I think there's really neat opportunities there. And in like Third Street's case, we also get cooling in ways that we don't have. And if anybody's been there, we need it.
Yeah, that's a great way to sell it, I think, is the cooling element. We're getting rid of the gas line and we're adding cooling at the same time.
I have a couple other things. The other funding source, which I'm totally blanking, is the funding we receive from oil and gas development, the FMLD. Yeah, and there's another one, there's two funds. And I used to track them all the time when I was at Clear, the severance tax. And we receive those funding, and that also feels like we've always kind of tried to earmark that a little bit for clean energy stuff. But this, I mean, talk about using that funds, those funds that we receive for a decarbonization project is pretty exciting and a cool nexus. So could be another just line item in our revenues that we allocate. It's not a separate fund, but we receive that. And I realize that might be a lot lower. I'm not tracking those recently. And then the other thing it's great you guys are gonna meet with staff, and I really wanna encourage staff to look at this as as kind of an innovative opportunity. In my, I'm just gonna tell a quick story. So the city of Grand Junction, their wastewater treatment plant captures methane, and they use it, turn it into compressed natural gas, and they run all of their garbage fleet off of methane from there for the city of Grand Junction. And that project moved forward because they had staff who were like, hey, we have to put $19 million or whatever into a new wastewater treatment plant. I've heard about this technology. They do it up in Tacoma. Why don't we do it? And they're one of the only ones in the state of Colorado who are doing this. And it's kind of those moments that staff can make a really big difference. And so I want to really encourage staff to look at this and I know staff is maxed. And so if it requires more, or we need to put some more resources into utilities for them to look at this, I'd be open to that. But I wouldn't want us to miss out on this opportunity unless it's absolutely impossible for staff to take on. But I just think that we can set direction and stuff, but it won't happen if we want to become the owners without kind of staff seeing this innovative opportunity. So
those conversations have already begun. We've had one meeting with staff and we've got another one coming up. I forget what day, next week.
23rd, 24th.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Are any of the drillers based in locally, or are they all just statewide or further far afield?
There's one new entrant locally, not sure if they'll bid on it.
Okay. Because I do feel like if we were able to find like a local, I mean, it seems like something where we could conceivably connect with the Garfield commissioners on, like, if we were able to be making this a transitional thing for drilling people to be switching from drilling for gas to drilling for, geothermal, and like building that business, they might actually help fund this or something.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It seems like a really good fit there, but I think, is it just different, the type of drilling that they do, so the firms are totally different? Or?
Yeah, the rigs that are kind of used for geothermal don't go as deep, and they're lighter and they're quieter for this type of of ambient temperature short boreholes. And the firm that did our test borehole used to work in oil and gas, and they saw an opportunity to focus exclusively on geothermal and have purchased rigs just for that.
Okay.
They're based on the Front Range. The other driller most likely would come from Montana and does a lot of the work in this region. There's a fair number of high-end homes up valley that are using geothermal, and many of them, they're drilling 3 times more feet than they need to, because it's back to how do they manage risk? Just, it's when money is no object and there's a renewable energy code from the Pickens County, they'll invest in the drilling. We're hoping to benefit from their familiarity with the region and piggyback on some of those projects in terms of timing.
Cool.
That is actually why, one of the reasons that this was Governor Polis's chair initiative for 2023. So geothermal was what he identified and his staff as this is the priority and through the Western Governors Association, and you're hitting the nail on the head. So while it might not be exactly the same drill bit and exactly the same rig, the trade tools in an emerging market are the same. So this is a really great opportunity for, cross-pollination, I think, of those industries coming together. Like we do energy, this energy, that energy. Yep.
Okay, I think you've got the feedback you needed. And thank you for the presentation and all the information. We look forward to the next conversation.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
You.
That is it for tonight, folks. Quick look ahead at our next meeting is on the 23rd. We're going to get a second quarter financial report and a calendar of our budget process. It'll be Christie's last meeting with us, formal official meeting. And then we're going to get an update on Town Center and hopefully give some guidance on next steps for that. So those are kind of the big items next time. All right, thanks.